The register beeped softly as May slid another bottle of sparkling water across the counter. The cafe was all glass and chrome, sunlight spilling in from the street outside, catching on the polished espresso machine. Her manager's voice cut from behind the counter. "Smile more, May." She didn't look up, just kept scanning items, her black hair pulled back, apron tied neat, hands moving with practiced precision. The investor walked in like he owned the air. Tailored suit, silver tie, watch so bright it caught her eye without meaning to. He was speaking rapid Mandarin into his phone, voice sharp with irritation, the kind of tone that made everyone in the small cafe turn their heads, and then look away. The barista froze mid-pour, customers paused mid-bite, but nobody said a word. May's eyes flicked up once, then down again. She caught every word, every clipped syllable. He was ripping into someone on the other end, his phrasing filled with financial jargon she knew most of the room wouldn't even recognize in English. She had spent 3 years in Shanghai, nights hunched over books, days juggling classes and part-time work. Mandarin had been her second heartbeat. The investor hung up, muttering something under his breath. Then he spoke again, this time to the man beside him, in halting English, complaining that nobody here could understand or fix what he was talking about. The man nodded, clueless, sipping his overpriced latte. May reached for the next order, her hands steady, her mind turning over the words she'd just heard. She knew she could solve the misunderstanding in less than a sentence. She also knew what would happen if she opened her mouth. The looks, the questions, the disbelief. She'd been here before, and she'd learned that sometimes silence was armor. But as the investor's voice rose again, frustration spilling into the air like steam, she felt the armor slip. May slid the receipt toward a customer, the paper curling under her fingertips. She caught her reflection in the glass counter. Plain black apron, hair tied back so tightly it looked severe, the faint shadows under her eyes from closing late and opening early. She'd been 19 when her father had said, "You'll never get far working behind a counter." She'd smiled then, because it was easier than explaining she wasn't here for far. She was here for quiet, for space. The cafe buzzed around her. The clink of cups, the hiss of milk steaming, the low hum of muted conversations. The investor's voice cut through it all, sharper than the rest, each Mandarin syllable precise, impatient. A few tables over, a pair of students glanced at him, then at each other, whispering in English. "Is he angry?" May's coworker, Lila, sidled up next to her at the register, leaning close. "That guy's giving me second-hand stress," she muttered, eyes on the investor. "He's been in here twice this week. Same attitude." May gave the smallest shrug. She wasn't in the habit of explaining that she understood everything he was saying, from the numbers he rattled off to the veiled insults he thought no one could catch. The manager appeared from the back, tie crooked, eyes darting to the investor. "Don't get in his way," he said to May under his breath. "Regular big spender. He doesn't like waiting." May just nodded, ringing up a cappuccino for the woman in front of her. The investor had moved to the counter now, tapping his phone against his palm. The man beside him, clearly a partner or assistant, was flipping through a folder, his brow furrowed. "Order for Mr. Lin?" Lila called out. The investor stepped forward, ignoring the coffee in favor of continuing his phone conversation. His Mandarin quickened, his tone snapping like a whip. Then, mid-sentence, he glanced at May, not seeing her, looking through her, before turning back to his call. May kept her face neutral, but her ears tracked every word. He was complaining about a failed shipment, the loss of a small 200,000, and the incompetence of the local office. She could hear the gaps, the way his assistant misunderstood terms, the subtle meanings lost in translation. The receipt printer whined. May tore the slip, sliding it across the counter toward a man in a suit who took it without thanks. Her movements were precise, deliberate, the same way they'd been when she'd once served tea in Shanghai boardrooms for professors and visiting CEOs during her internship. Nobody here knew that. A spoon clattered onto the tile near the investor's feet. Without looking, he pointed toward it, speaking to the assistant in English. "Pick it up. These people can't even keep a cafe clean." The words weren't meant for her, but she felt them anyway. And for the first time that morning, she lifted her eyes fully to meet his. The investor didn't hold her gaze for more than a second. He was already turning back to his phone, barking instructions in Mandarin so quickly most people would have thought it was all one word. May lowered her eyes, not because she'd been dismissed, but because she wanted him to think she had. Her coworker Lila noticed. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered, sliding a latte toward a waiting customer. May didn't answer. Words were currency in rooms like this, and she had learned long ago that spending them too soon was a mistake. The assistant came to the counter, folder still in hand. Do you have soy milk?" he asked, his accent thick, the words careful. May nodded, moving to the fridge. Behind him, the investor switched to broken English, his irritation sharper now that he knew nobody here could challenge it. "They're not professional here. Slow. No understanding." A man in line snorted, amused. "Bet he's saying worse too. Han that." May set the soy milk down with a quiet click. The manager appeared again, this time with a forced smile. "Mr. Lin, sir," he began, "if there's anything we can do to make your visit smoother—" "Have someone competent explain these numbers to my partner," Lin replied in English, gesturing to the papers in the assistant's hands. "But clearly there is no one here who can." His Mandarin followed immediately, a rapid-fire summary of the problem, thick with industry-specific language. May caught all of it, every figure, every frustration. She also caught the moment he made a small but dangerous mistake, a misused term that, if repeated, could sour the negotiation he'd clearly flown in to finalize. Her fingers itched to correct it. "Order for table 3, Lila called, sliding another drink down the counter. A teenage boy in a hoodie leaned toward May. "Hey, what language is that? Sounds intense." She glanced at him, offering the smallest answer. "Mandarin." The investor's voice rose again, slicing through the cafe's hum. His assistant was nodding along, not taking notes, eyes glazed, the look of someone pretending to understand. "Excuse me," a woman in a camel coat said to May, irritation in her voice. "Can you be quicker? Some of us have to get back to work." May rang her up without comment, bagging a croissant with the same deliberate care she used for every order. The woman's impatience bounced off her like rain off glass. Across the counter, Lin was now visibly frustrated, rapping his knuckles against the marble. "This is ridiculous," he said to the manager. "Find someone, now." The manager turned, scanning the room. His eyes flicked to May, then away just as quickly. "She's just the cashier," he told Lin. The words landed like a stamp, final, dismissive. May finished pouring an espresso shot, setting it down so gently the cup didn't even clink, against the saucer. Her heart was steady now, the kind of calm that came before a choice. She knew that if she opened her mouth, the entire room would change. The question was whether it was worth it. The investor's assistant shuffled his papers again, his eyes darting between numbers he clearly didn't grasp. Lin's jaw tightened. "This meeting will fail before it starts," he muttered in Mandarin, his voice low but cutting. Then, in English, "No one here is qualified. We should leave." May set down the glass she'd been drying. The choice made itself. She stepped out from behind the register, moving with the same quiet precision she used to restock cups. But instead of heading to the back, she stopped beside the assistant's elbow. Her voice was steady, almost conversational, in perfect Mandarin. "You meant projected gross margin," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Not net. If you present it the other way, they'll think you're padding the figures." The cafe froze. Lila's hand halfway to the espresso machine stilled. The teenage boy in the hoodie blinked like he'd misheard. Lin's eyes snapped to her, his frown deepening. Not in anger now, but in disbelief. "You speak Mandarin?" His voice was sharp, almost testing. May met his gaze. "Fluently." The assistant shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe—" She memorized a phrase, he offered in English, his tone too casual. A couple at the corner table chuckled under their breath. May ignored them. She picked up the assistant's folder, flipped to the relevant page, and translated Lin's last 5 sentences back into English. Not just word for word, but with the exact financial terms that made every head in earshot lift. The corner table couple stopped smiling. Lin's expression changed first. The faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. "Your accent," he said in Mandarin, "is Beijing standard." May inclined her head. "I studied at Fudan University," she replied in the same language, each syllable as crisp as the next. From behind her, the manager spoke up, his voice tight. "May, back to the register, please." Lin's eyes flicked toward him, then back to her. "Continue," he said simply, waving a hand toward his assistant. The assistant bristled. "We don't know she's correct." May reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, battered notebook. She opened it to a page dense with Mandarin characters, handwritten in tight, neat lines, notes from lectures, case studies, vocabulary drills. She set it down on the counter without a word. The assistant's protest faltered. "Order for Lin," Lila said weakly, but nobody moved to collect it. Lin leaned back slightly, watching her. "Translate this," he said in Mandarin, then launched into a paragraph so fast most native speakers would have asked for repetition. May didn't blink. She rendered it into perfect English, figures, clauses, and all, and then translated the reply he might need, offering 2 possible phrasings depending on the tone he wanted to strike. The cafe was utterly silent now, every hiss of the espresso machine suddenly too loud. Lin smiled fully this time. "Not a single word missed," he said, switching to English. Then he turned to the manager. "She stays." The manager opened his mouth, closed it, and stepped back. Lin looked at May again. "You just saved me $500,000. She didn't smile. "Just doing my job." The rest of the conversation between Lin and his assistant was no longer a conversation. It was a lesson. Lin spoke, May translated, and every time she clarified a number or rephrased a clause, the assistant's pen scribbled faster. The manager hovered in the corner, his tie somehow looking even more crooked than before. He didn't try to interrupt again. Lila kept working the machine, but her glances toward May were different now. Not curiosity, but respect. When Lin finally pocketed his phone, he reached into his briefcase and slid a sakyo, thin envelope across the counter. "For your time," he said in English, though his eyes stayed on hers like he was still speaking Mandarin. May didn't move to take it. "I'm on shift," she replied. A beat. Then Lin chuckled quietly, withdrawing the envelope and replacing it with a business card. "Then off shift, call me. My office needs someone who knows what they're doing." He left with his assistant, the door's bell chiming once before the cafe's ambient noise returned. But it wasn't the same room anymore. By closing time, the ripples had already begun. The couple in the corner avoided her eyes as they left. The teenage boy gave her a small nod, the kind you give someone you've just seen do something you didn't think was possible. Even the woman in the camel coat mumbled a soft, "Thank you," when May handed her a to-go cup. The next week, a rumor threaded its way through the cafe's regulars. The investor had signed a deal that hinged on some woman in a coffee shop saving his presentation. No names, but May heard enough to know the story had taken on a life of its own. 3 days later, Lin's office called. They offered her a position, Title, salary, the works. She listened in silence, the phone warm against her ear. Outside her apartment window, the city moved in slow streams of headlights. She thought of her father's voice. You'll never get far working behind a counter. She thought of the counter itself, the register, the feel of her hands moving over coffee cups and receipts. I'll think about it, she said, and meant it. Weeks later, she walked back into the cafe, not in an apron, but in a simple navy dress. Lila did a double take. The new barista, a young man with shaky hands, offered her a cappuccino. You're her, aren't you? He asked. May tilted her head, took the cup. Just here for a meeting. But when Lynn arrived, his greeting was warm, his handshake steady. The manager avoided her gaze entirely. They sat by the window discussing contracts, and she spoke only when needed, her words crisp, her presence unshakable. On her way out, she paused, by the counter, running a hand lightly over the surface she'd once stood behind for hours at a time. The cafe smelled the same. The register beeped as it always had. But she knew, and they knew, it wasn't the same place anymore. You know what it's like to be underestimated? To have people look past you until you show them what they should have seen all along. You've walked into rooms that weren't built for you, and left with them never quite the same. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let's keep walking through these stories together.